I guess it's inevitable that after spending so much time with board games, some of us would want to make our own games.
But sometimes it's hard to come up with ideas. Sometimes it feels like work. A lot of the time it feels like work. Thankfully, we live in the 21st century where just about everything can be gamified. And that's where GameStormers comes in.
This is a snap review for Gamestormers. Gamestormers is a creative tableau-building card game where you take on the role of a game designer.
You'll be in a battle of 3 to 6 people all trying to prove to the elder GameStormer that you can make the best game. It'll take you about an hour to do so.
So let's talk about the art here. You have player boards and 4 different kinds of cards. The boards have a sketched out grid with space for several concepts.
One of the unique things about GameStormers is that because of its subject matter, it's got to touch on a lot of different genres like horror and sci-fi, fantasy, and high seas, and just some general civilizations. All of these appear on different cards for storyline mechanics and items, and it's really a treat for the eyes to take in all the different pieces of art you'll be playing down onto your player boards.
The graphic design does a great job at subtly reinforcing the different card types. The art is consistent across all the genres, which encourages some experimentation, like high seas with fantasy or even with sci-fi. But they also obviously belong to their specific genre. You'll never wonder what cards, quote, go together. The character cards all look very interesting. They don't belong to any specific genres, but they do look like people I'd want to talk to.
The art is rich and the colors are saturated. It's definitely a more modern art style.
Okay, you like the art.
I do.
How do you actually play this game?
Well, we already touched on it at the top. In GameStormers, your goal is to have the most victory points to convince the elder GameStormer that you make the best games. And you'll do that by playing cards, storyline cards, mechanic cards, and item cards onto your playmat.
You'll start the game with a mechanic and an item card in your hand, and you'll pick between 2 characters to put a character down on your mat.
On your turn, you take 2 actions in any order. The item market.
Take a card from the face-up market into your hand.
The theater.
Roll the theater dice. Then use a blank card to create a storyline, mechanic, or item. Put that card in your hand. It'll be worth 2 victory points if you play it out onto your board later on.
The forum.
Draw the top 3 cards from either the storyline or the mechanic deck. Keep 1, discard the rest.
The temple.
Use the ability of an item or a storyline card in your hand and then discard it.
Or finally, the arena.
Declare that you've entered the arena and take a token.
Once everyone has taken their turn, if multiple players have entered the arena, they each draw a storyline, item, and mechanic card. Using these 3 cards, they create a game narrative and they pitch it to the table. Whoever gets the most votes for best pitch keeps their arena token and their opponent's. Every competitor gets to keep 1 of the 3 cards that they drew.
Then every player puts a card on their notebook playmat.
After 5 rounds, everyone's notebook will be full. Each player gives a 2-minute overview of the game they've created, and everyone conducts an anonymous vote. The winner gets the Designer's Choice Award, which is worth 2 more points.
Then you'll tally up your points according to the scoreboard and any special abilities you have on your cards. The player with the most points wins.
At higher player counts, there is a slightly less complex party variant in the rulebook. We'll leave you to find out about that for yourselves.
So Andrew, what did you expect from Gamestormers?
I came into GameStormers with a blank slate. This is the only game designed by John Spike, who is admittedly specifically focused on the educational side of gaming. His company is GameStormEDU, after all. So I was a little worried that we'd have a game that was focused a little bit too much on education and mechanics and not enough on fun.
I wondered what it meant that we'd summon a game within the game itself. That didn't make any sense to me.
But there were some surprises here as well. GameStormers was more fun than I expected. I like that you're creating the narrative of a game, but I did find that our kids really struggled with telling the story of a game.
The kids weren't the only ones.
The stories they told were just stories. There really isn't enough here, even with mechanics and items, to push the narrative in a direction where you need to have the players do something.
I agree. This feels like a storytelling game. The mechanics of the game are fine, but they put me into a mindset where I'm just trying to get the most points, rather than figure out the best game combination and story. It felt like something was missing, what game developers call the magic circle, to get everyone really involved in playing the same game together. So, Andrew, would we recommend Gamestormers?
Well, I think GameStormers does have a place on a shelf, but I think it's a really particular place on a really particular shelf. If you're a family that loves to tell stories, GameStormers is really cool.
It's beautiful, and the graphic design is on point. But it turns out this kind of game is a hard sell for a lot of people. And there are a lot of other games trying to do this kind of thing already in slightly different ways.
The idea that GameStormers is doing games instead of stories is novel, but kind of like I said before, there's not really enough to make that difference stand out. GameStormers is pretty good at what it's going for, there's just a super limited audience for it. But if you are that audience, we're going to rate GameStormers 3.5 mechanics out of 5.
And that's Gamestormers
in a snap.